It's one of the questions I want to ask you about, right? I'm Jamaican. My background is Jamaican, right? So I've been noticing that it's a lot of like different, like say Chinese, like in all these other Caribbean countries and like in Africa, and these are all places that once was owned by, ran by Europeans or Americans. How comes Americans and the Europeans are making the Chinese take over all these places they once ruled, like the Caribbeans and in Africa?
Great question. A couple of points. Point number one, when the Europeans left the islands at the end of slavery and colonization, they left East Indians and Chinese in charge of the economy to make sure African people could never be financially empowered. So the Chinese and the East Indians were used as a buffer between the colonizer and the black man and woman. No one expected China to reinvent herself in the modern time. So when Mao Zedong led the Chinese Revolution, it caught the whole world off guard because no one really saw China as having the potential of being an economic power. So what Mao Zedong did was he said, we're not going to waste a lot of time trying to come up with an original invention out of the Chinese mind. We're going to send our youth all around the world to study what everybody else does. And we're going to learn how to replicate what is already on the market. So the Chinese, they cornered the avenue of reproducing automobile, reproducing computer, reproducing telephone, reproducing cheap goods, reproducing clothing and apparel. The Chinese said, we don't have to outdo them. All we have to do is replicate them. And in doing that, China became the Walmart of the planet Earth. Whereas from a capitalist economy, the things you sell require people to have a good enough source of income to afford it. You're selling a house, you're selling a car, you're selling an HD TV. You have to be able to afford that. China stepped back and China said, 2/3 of the world lives on less than $5 a day. So if 2/3 of the world lives on less than $5 a day, we can beat capitalism, i.e. the white man, by simply catering to the needs of the world's poor. So when China started becoming the world's largest manufacturer of cheap goods, they automatically created a dependency of all the poor people in the world upon China for food, clothing, and everything. So the white man says, how do we stop this growing power that China is having? We was looking at controlling the expensive goods, the diamonds and all of that. Chinese said, forget all that. We're going to make cheap guns. We're going to make cheap food. We're going to make cheap clothes. We're going to make cheap cars. We're going to corner the market on poverty. So now the problem that the white man got is the yellow man has a monopoly on cheap goods. Everybody in the world is dependent on China if you live an impoverished lifestyle. How can capitalism undermine communism when capitalism is about the big dollar and communism is about the small dollar? So now we come to the modern era. The Chinese have always had an agenda of global conquest, politically speaking. So they're looking at this and they say, wait a minute, the black man is tired of the white man. But the black man is also multicultural, so the black man won't understand that the yellow man is as racist as the white man. So in the post-colonial Africa, post-colonial the Caribbean islands, we saw the Russians at first during the Cold War as an ally. Then we woke up and recognized that the Russians were still white and racist. So then when the Chinese start showing up in Africa with these loans, the black man said, well, white man didn't work. Let's work with the yellow man. Now, the reason China is so thirsty for Africa is because whoever controls Africa controls the world. Because most of the minerals necessary for a technologically sophisticated society and for a militaristically dominant society Those minerals come from Africa.
Yeah.
So if you want to be the biggest economy, you got to control the resources of the continent. If you want to be the strongest military, you got to control the resources of the continent. Now, there's other reasons why China is in love with Africa and the Caribbean islands. Number one, China is overpopulated. I was invited to speak there twice. Overpopulated. You think rush hour in Miami or something? Go to rush hour in China. It might take you 3 hours to get home. That's why everybody ride bikes in China, because they don't want to wait in the traffic. So the Chinese man, the yellow man, he needs to be able to unload his excess population. He got 2 billion. We got to get him up out of here. What better place than Africa? So much of the continent is undeveloped. We can spread them all over. So that's one benefit to Africa. I can get rid of all my undesirables. Number one. Number two, I have a surplus of cheap goods. Even though I run the market on cheap goods, I got a surplus of cheap goods. Where can I go and sell these cheap materials and turn a profit? What better place than Africa? And then on top of that, I need some sort of control over the resources of the land in order to make myself a global power. That's Africa. Same thing with the Caribbean islands. Now, the danger of Jamaica coming so close to being called a Chinese colony lies in the fact that most people see Jamaica as the most revolutionary of the islands. So if China can take Jamaica, China can take the whole Caribbean.
Else, yeah.
They sold the port, very dangerous to do that. They let the Chinese buy that build that east-west highway, north-south highway, and then they gave the Chinese all the money from the tolls. They get to collect all the toll money on this highway for like the next 15 years. Why would you do that? If you're going to pay them, pay them. But here's the issue I got with Jamaica. I got with Africa. I got it with all the black countries when it comes to China. You have universities in Jamaica. You have universities in Africa. Why are you hiring Chinese engineers to come build your roads, build your buildings, create your infrastructure? If you have an engineering program, your students should be building your buildings. Your students should be laying down your roads. And I was in Jamaica last, they told me, they said, Dr. Umar, that the Chinese put this road down right now. 2 years later, it'll be rolling back up like a fruit roll up. They told me it's not even quality. They told me that in Jamaica. They said it's not even, come back in a year, this road will be rolling up like a fruit, like a blunt. You can roll the road up like a blunt, right?
Yeah.
So they're not even using quality material, they're using garbage. And they're getting all these concessions from the Jamaican government, from African government. Uganda, I think it was, one of the African countries had to sell off, what did they sell off? They sold off a port. They lost a port to the Chinese because they defaulted on a loan. All this the Chinese is doing, none of it is being done as a handout. It's all loans with conditions. And the Chinese are creating conditions that they know you can't fulfill because ultimately they want the whole country. And then you have the danger of what's happening in Nigeria, where the Chinese men are marrying Nigerian women, having babies with Nigerian women, because in most African countries, foreigners can't own land. So the Chinese say, if I can't own land, how do I get around owning the land? Impregnate the women. That child is a Nigerian, even though he's gonna be loyal to China. You see that? So in the next 40 years, you're gonna have a whole class of Chinese Nigerians, Chinese Jamaicans, you follow me? Who have the blood of their mother, but the mentality of their father. It's colonization all over again. And I think when we talk about this whole snow bunny crisis, I think Caribbean governments and African governments need to pass laws that make it illegal for foreigners and immigrants to come in their country and intentionally mass impregnate the black women. They're doing it. You can tell why they're doing it. You can tell. We're going to do this so we can rule this land through our mixed race Chinese African children. Something needs to be done about that, because if you have poor African women looking for a better life, I understand. I'm gonna have this Chinese man's baby because I've already been brainwashed into thinking Chinese are smarter than Africans. You feel me?
Yeah.
So the women are going to do it. Here's the issue with the Caribbean and Africa. Any country that allows immigrants and foreigners into their land, who show up with wealth, who can invest and build, if you do not empower the native Jamaican, the native Nigerian to build in their native land, You can count the amount of years.
How
you can
gonna-
count the years.
The control you're going to have.
Before the Chinese will own it.
Yeah.
You can count the years before they'll own Nigeria. You
Makes
follow?
sense, yeah, facts.
I'm the president. He's a foreigner. He has his own money. You don't have nothing. You live here. You was born here. This is your land.
Mm-hmm.
But he's coming with a line of credit from China. You have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't empower you as a government to build your own, it's a matter of time that he'll own it. You see the same thing in South Africa. When I was last in South Africa, they told me, Dr. Umar, if the South African government keeps on allowing East Indians and Chinese to come into South Africa, we can see a time where there will be more of them than it is us. And we already have that reality where? Trinidad. In Trinidad and Tobago, the East Indian outnumbers the African. So God forbid if there was a clash, the East Indians would probably win, not just on numerical strength, but they own the used car industry. They own and run a lot of the petty shops. So not only do I have a numerical minority over the black man, I have an economic influence over the black man. They told me flat out that the East Indians are the ones bringing the drugs and the guns in through the used cars. They said they pack the used car with the dope and the guns, and that's how they bring it into Trinidad. So they already know what's going on. But my point is, Trinidad is just one example. If you keep on letting immigrants come in, invest, buy land, own land, build industry, and you don't empower Jamaicans, Nigerians, or anyone else to push back and challenge them, you basically sold your island to them already.
All right, but Umar,
Makes
though,
sense.
but you don't believe in voting, so how?
No, I believe in voting when I have something to vote for.
Okay.
The issue with electoral politics and black people, whether it's America, Africa, or the Caribbean, is we often have nothing to vote for. And the reason we often have nothing to vote for is this party and its so-called antagonist, this party, are both financed by that Chinese man. They're both financed by that white man.
Yeah.
They're both financed by that East Indian. So they got everybody running around Jamaica, who you going to vote for? Running around the United States of America, who you going to vote for? Running around South Africa, who you going to vote for? When at the end of the day, no matter who wins, he wins because he financed both campaigns. I'm not against voting, but I will only vote when you give me a reason.
Okay.
Let's take voting in America. Black people in America never get anything when they vote. So how do they motivate us to vote if we never get nothing when we do? Fear. Black people are the only constituency in this country who vote out of fear. In other words, I'm not voting to stop police brutality because they're not going to stop it. I'm not voting to change mass incarceration and not going to change it. I'm not voting to fix the schools, they're never going to fix them. So what you voting for? Because I'm afraid of what Trump might do. You see that? That's how we vote, fear. Now, when the Jews go to the polls, when the Latinos go to the polls, when the Arabs, the East Indians, the Anglo-Saxons go to the polls, they're going for concessions. I'm getting something out of this vote. I'm getting something that we already agreed upon before election day. Black people are getting nothing. We vote out of fear. Our motivation is fear. Joe Biden may do nothing for you, but Donald Trump will be worse. See how that works? This is how they get us out. The black man is the only one in the voting line voting because he's scared of what the other man might do to him.
The other people they already got something coming to them already.
Absolutely,
coming.
absolutely.
All right, and even the first question about Jamaica, right? I was watching in the Africa. I was watching something the other day on live, and you said something like the Chinese and the white Americans or Europeans. You said like in Yale, I forgot Yale or Harvard. You said they're doing a study where they're trying to combine the race together.
Well,
I don't know if I'm saying it wrong.
Two things. You're combining 2 points. Let me break them down. One is the Chinese are suing. They brought suit to the U.S. Supreme Court. They're suing Harvard and the University of North Carolina, but they're being financed by white racist conservatives. So white people are using the Chinese.
So basically they're in cahoots, I'm trying to say.
They're in cahoots
to
overthrow affirmative action in college admission decisions. So for example, you apply to the University of Miami. They're going to look at your socioeconomic status. They're going to look at the challenges you went through to get here. They're going to look at who you are as a person, right? Now, the Chinese guy might got a higher test score than you. But the University of North Carolina, Harvard, and the other school going to say, okay, they might have a higher test score, but he's a much more well-rounded student. He's what we're looking for. Not only that, we need to make sure we have some black people in here because at the end of the day, aren't they the people who built this country? Not the Chinese. Black people did, right? So the Chinese are saying, screw all that. Screw slavery, screw history. We don't care. If we got higher test scores and better grades, we should automatically get the spot. We don't care about race, culture, previous condition of servitude, socioeconomic status. The Chinese want all that thrown out, and they want every college in America to strictly look at test scores and grades.
Okay. All right.
If they succeed, and mind you, the white man is funding this. So this is a white-Chinese alliance to gentrify the black student off the PWI's campus. If they succeed, the amount of black students at the PWI, which is already small, is going to get smaller. You're going to see a situation where the only black people at a white school are going to be the athletes, right? The amount of Chinese at the PWI is going to go up about 50, 60% if the Supreme Court overthrows this. Now, here's what I need y'all to understand. The white man don't care about Chinese. He don't care about Chinese. He's using the Chinese because if the white man says white students are being discriminated against in preference for black students, that's gonna look like obvious racism, ain't it? That's obvious racism. So we're gonna use the yellow people. If we use the yellow people, it don't look like racism.
Yeah.
So this ain't nothing but white racism in a yellow face.
Yeah.
You understand? But this ain't the first time that whites and Asians have worked together. I believe that the US government, the white power structure, is going to use the Chinese American as its new probationary white. The Chinese American is being groomed to be a substitute class for white people, given that the numbers are shrinking in this country. 25 states have a zero population growth rate for white people. More white people are dying than being born in 25 states. Whenever they have a population drop in American history, they always look to find another group that they can bring in and bring them under the white umbrella. Arabs, for example. As much as America claims to have an issue with the Arabic countries and the so-called war on terrorism, Arabs are considered white for purposes of the US Census. If you are an Arab, you are white in this country.
Yeah.
Oh yes, Arabs are white.
Damn.
Chinese historically fought to be considered white, but they lost in court. Chinese Mexicans also fought to be called white and they lost in court. So the Chinese would be more than happy to finally get that white status. But whether or not they get the white status or not, they're still going to be figuratively and practically a probationary white group that can be used to keep black people in their place. Just like with COVID, you're not going to tell me that the Chinese government and the American government didn't work together to release COVID. You can't tell me that these two countries can't stand each other, but y'all was able to get along long enough to get that Wuhan lab up and popping and get that COVID running around. I'll be honest with you. I think the white man and the yellow man have already decided they're going to take the black man's land. I believe this. And I believe to a large extent in public, China and America are acting like they don't like each other. They don't like each other. But when it comes to Africa, they're acting like they don't like each other when they really have a deal behind closed doors. You understand me? I believe America and China has already met and said, listen, if these Negroes are going to keep on letting us in and doing what we want, y'all take these countries, we going to take these countries to prevent a World War III. I really believe that. The Chinese man and the American white man, they're working together. Just like they're doing with the Harvard lawsuit and the Carolina lawsuit, they're working together.
Gotcha.
So I'm saying, how do you think we as blacks get it back to the Black Wall Street days and those type of times?
Well, you change nothing for African people until you change the consciousness of African people. Our biggest issue is our psychology. We are multicultural to a fault. We have been brainwashed by black religion into believing putting your race first is a sin against God. We're the only people whose religion is totally separate from their political struggle. The European Jew can go into a synagogue and pray to his white God. And when he's done praying to his white God in the synagogue, he can sit around and talk about how to get the rest of your money right there in the synagogue. When the Arab is done making salat on Friday, he can stay in the masjid and talk about how to open up a few more 7-Elevens in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Do you understand? There's no separation between worship of God and political economic empowerment. But when you come to the black community, go to one of these churches in Miami and say you want to have a conversation on Sunday about how to bring back the black dollar, how to make the Democratic Party accountable to black people, how to make the police accountable to the black community. You know what they're going to tell you? We don't allow political conversation in here. This is the Lord's house. You come here to pray. You want to talk that black stuff? Go down the street. They don't do that in the Jewish synagogue. They don't do that in the Arab masjid. Yeah. The Chinese are Christian too, some of them, but guess what? In the Chinese church, they handle all business pertinent to the Chinese people right there. We are split. How can I serve a God that doesn't allow me to organize for black power in the name of that God? And so religion has hypnotized us into a multiculturalism that is going to put black people in a state of perpetual genocide if we don't do something soon. Being ashamed to be black, hating being black, not wanting to be black. What do you see going on right now? This whole identity crisis we got in the black consciousness community. Negroes hate being black so much, they wake up one day, I'm a Native American.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm a Cherokee. Yeah. I'm a Choctaw. Yeah. I'm a Seminole.
Yep.
But nobody told them the Cherokees owned African slaves. Nobody told them the Choctaws owned African slaves. Nobody told them the Seminoles owned African slaves. So if your mother got Cherokee in her family, how do we know your mother wasn't a slave of the Cherokee?
Damn. Yeah.
And the 5 major Native American tribes fought with the Confederacy against the freedom of black people. They fought to maintain slavery, and we running around bragging, talking about I got Native American. So red blood is better than white blood? Slave blood is slave blood. I don't give a damn if it's a red slave master, a yellow slave master, or a brown slave master. The point that I'm making is this. If we want black people to get on board with a truly global Pan-African liberation struggle, we have to give them something to be proud of. The most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said we have to sell black people back to themselves. We have to make them proud to be black, and that begins with economics and education. Until we can hire black men, until we can hire black women, until we can provide an economic opportunity for members of our community, they'll never be loyal to us. And that's why we have more sellouts, more traitors, more Negropeans, more snow bunny lovers than any other race, because we are the least likely to be able to provide an opportunity for our own people. Chinese kids can get a job from the Chinese community. Arabs can get a job from the Arab community. Latinos can get a job from the Latino community. Mm-hmm. How many black kids in Miami who need an after-school job can come and get one from black people? And then you got the black church, the biggest exploiter of the black community, taking in billions of dollars a year. Billions! Y'all got mega churches in Miami.
Yeah.
How many black men these mega churches putting to work? How many single mothers these mega churches in Miami putting to work? Are any of these mega churches fighting against mass incarceration, miseducation, gentrification, police genocide, or access to wealth? None of them. You can't find a church in America that's at the front line of fighting for better schools, against police brutality, against economic apartheid, against miseducation and mass incarceration. How can you claim to be a servant of the Lord? How can you claim to be a man of God, but you okay with your people living in hell?
Nah, man.
Black people living in hell. Black people living in hell, catching hell, living in hell. And the pastor, who's supposed to be an agent of the Lord, is absolutely comfortable with you living in hell.